usually when we wonder about the relationship between ancient Greek religion and the beginning of philosophy, we focus on two things. The so-called public religion in ancient Greece, which is the religion of the gods of the Olympus, right, Zeus, and the gods who are like superhumans, and they usually relate to an outlook of reality that highlights the power of reality or its beauty. For example, from the strength of the thunder comes one god, and from the impetuosity of the ocean comes another god, and from the movement of the sun is provoked by another god. Is the idea that you look at nature and you connect some events in nature to the existence of a god who is a superhuman being with vices and virtues. So in a sense, the public religion in Greece is like contemporary superheroes movies for us. It's just like seeing nature through with the glasses of some very powerful beings. Interestingly enough, today in our movies, the gods of Greek mythology appear not as real gods, but as superheroes like the other ones. So, and the other one is the so-called religion of mysteries, the Orphic religion, Orphism, and which is religion to which usually we connect the development of the interiority in philosophy. So, in other words, when we look at philosophy from the viewpoint of the reflections of the first naturalistic philosophers, pre-Socratic philosophers, from Thales to the pluralists, we see that they say that the first principle of everything, the arche, right, is divine, or that God is in everything. Usually we say that these philosophers are influenced, are affected by the public religion, because public religion was seeing nature, connecting nature to gods, right? So, and then when we see other aspects of philosophy that relates to our interiority, our soul, our demon, to use an Orphic term and also a Socratic term, when we see, for example, the doctrine that was very important in some, for example, in Pythagoras, of the reincarnation, these doctrines, or even the life after death, and in general, life as a purification in this of some kind of sin. When we look at these elements, also in the philosophers, we say usually that they are affected by this religion of the mysteries, the Orphic religion. Now, I'm always uncomfortable with this simplification, and not about the Orphic religion. I mean, I think it's more reasonable to connect some of these insights, which at the beginning are not very philosophical, so they are more religious, but to philosophy. But about public philosophy, I'm very uncomfortable. To me, it looks the other way around. What I mean is that the way I see it is more correct to say that it is public philosophy which is generated somehow by the same kind of outlook that then philosophy develops using wonder and rationality through the first philosophers. Otherwise, when Thales, for example, says that there are gods in everything, and that the first principle, which is water, is divine, this would just an irrational element coming from his mythology, right? So that wouldn't have anything to do with his being a philosopher, with his rationality, because philosophy is about rationality, it's about looking at reality and seeing something that requires a logical answer somehow. Whether the answer is correct or incorrect, it doesn't matter, but there must be something logical about this. So if this is all that we should say about all the references to the divine in the pre-Socratic philosophers, from Thales to Pythagoras to the number is divine in Pythagoras, to the love in Empedocles and the nous in the intellect in Anaxagoras, if this is all about just the mythological ingredient, because they're children of their time too, and so they just overlapped the divine of the public religion in nature with their reflections about nature. If this is all that there is to it, it's very poor, and we should actually get rid of it and just focus on the logic. The way I see it is different. To me, Greek public religion comes from our usual attitude, we as humans, in every civilization, to see nature as insufficient to provide an explanation for itself. Nature calls for a higher answer. And so usually the non-philosopher just creates some kind of religious attitude, and maybe some mythology like in the public religion of Greek society. But the philosophers actually starts working on that. He would see a problem in reality. So let's say that Thales and the other philosophers didn't just, because this is the simplistic way to look at it, that the first philosophers were just naturalist philosophers. They were just looking at some material events in nature and trying to offer an explanation for it. But since they were children of their time, they overlapped this explanation of physical phenomena to their religious beliefs, and so sometimes they call these things divine. What about this is not all they were doing? What if this is our reductive viewpoint about their effort? So let's say that they had much more open mind. So let's say that when Thales was looking at reality, at the becoming of reality, he was actually looking at the whole problem of becoming, and he was already getting the insight that then will require some more development in the history of the philosophy of God, but some insight about the fact that if something changes and becomes, if something moves, the very existence of this movement and becoming requires something transcending the level of becoming, something that does not become. But this something, of course, in this reflection, he would overlap this insight about this need of a transcendent foundation of the level of being that just becomes, which is imperfect, is insufficient. Becoming means that you are not already. So, certainly he overlapped this insight with material, with his way to look at the material things. So he overlaps this insight about the divine with the insight about matter and about material explanations. Fine, of course. But what if what he was looking at was bigger? And so, in a sense, when he called divine the first principle, it's not just because he was, affected by some irrational beliefs, but because he kind of sensed that this principle of everything, precisely because it was supposed to be the principle of the existence of everything, and everything moves, must have something different, something that does not move. What if this is what all these philosophers sensed about reality, especially when they got higher and they didn't focus just on movement and on efficient causality, but also on the order, intelligibility. So from this viewpoint, it's much easier to see that when they saw this entire world, the universe, as a rational machine, something that has already, in Pythagoras requires the order of the number, and in Empedocles requires the order of love, not just as a blind force, but as an ordering principle. And Anaxagoras actually, for the first time, called it intellect. So what if all these philosophers saw that for the existence of this universe as an ordered reality, as intelligible, there must need an intellect which transcends the level of what we understand when we look at the world. As if we were looking at a Ferrari and we saw that the Ferrari by itself is not able to explain what it is, its own existence, its own being. So clearly we are talking about philosophers who come before more nuanced distinctions. So there is an overlapping, there is no doubt about it. But what if they were looking at the whole picture? And so we would be adopting a reductive viewpoint if we just reduce them to be just the physicists of their time and, partly religious believers, so that they just call some physical principle a divine. What if they were not looking for a physical principle in the first place? They were just looking for the principle, whether it is physical or not physical. And they overlapped insights about both the explanation of material changes and the explanation of their transcendent, foundation. From this viewpoint, if this is right, the insights about the first principle of everything that we see from Thales to the pluralists, Anaxagoras especially, is an insight not only about the way in which we can explain physical changes at the physical level, but also an insight at the same time about the way in which we can explain the need for this world as a physical world, for a cause which transcends its limitation. If that's true, these insights would coincide perfectly with what eventually will become the first proof for the existence of God in Aristotle, and for the proofs for the existence of God in Thomas Aquinas, which is a synthesis, of course, of previous philosophers. All these proofs begin showing that in the very existence we experience, we, both as ordinary people and philosophers, there is something that shows that reality is not self-sufficient. It requires a higher level of causality. This is the first principle to approach logically the existence of God. And this, I think, is what we see at the beginning, in a very preliminary way, in the first philosophers. They were so strong about following just their own, reasoning and insights about reality that they pretty soon put in doubt that very religion that other authors think that they were affected by. They actually destroyed this religion after a while because it was a mythology after all.